I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Aditya. So just before we get into the webinar, I wanted to just say a little bit about Aditya. Aditya Challapally is a machine learning engineer and product lead. He currently works at Microsoft, where he helps build Gen AI products that are used by millions globally. He's also an advisor to several Silicon Valley startups and Fortune 500 companies. Aditya lectures on product management and AI, both at Stanford School of Engineering and Center for Professional Development. Aditya is here as part of a new course as well that just launched on July 29th. And if you want to learn more about the course, there are links to the course listed here within the platform. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Aditya to start our webinar.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jess. I'm super excited to be here. And the title for today's webinar is Identifying AI Opportunities, like a strategy for market success. But really what I want to do is bust a lot of myths with you that people seem to have about AI and Gen AI. And one of the most common set of questions that we get around Gen AI is, how do I personally succeed in Gen AI and AI? How do I get in? And if I'm in there, how do I succeed as a business or technical professional? And we've done a lot of research on that topic as well. And so I'm super excited to share those bits of questions with you. And obviously there's a Q&A section where you can post questions, and we'll stop very regularly to get some of those questions, as well as we'll have points throughout this presentation where I'll ask you questions just to understand if you are understanding the process so far. Okay, cool. So a little bit about the information in this webinar. It's taken from the course that Jess mentioned that me and a Stanford professor teach. To get the information in this course, we spoke to 50 plus executives. We did a user research survey of 300 plus users. And we've put a lot of thought into making sure that these answers are correct, that they're valid, and sort of backed by a lot of data. So let's dive into it. So one of the first things I want to talk about is this curve, where I want to talk about a phenomenon with you. Specifically, you can post your guesses in the chat about what you think this phenomenon might be. And so I'm going to give you the answer, the first version of this answer right now. This is the internet. So initially people thought it's a bubble, where they said, is it a bubble or is it going to create real value? There was a lot of discussion. And then people started saying, oh, we have other priorities. We've built an internal tool, to compensate or to deal with this work. And then people said, oh, companies started getting disrupted, new ones started getting created. And then we're here right now in this new process. And exactly, this is Gen AI. This is basically, Gen AI is following the exact same curve process as the internet. Literally bit by bit. People initially thought it was a bubble, and then they had some discussion around it. Now we're past that with Gen AI. We know it's clearly going to create a lot of value, but a lot of companies now are dealing with it by just building internal tools and not necessarily building user-facing products. And those people are losing. So the same people who did that with the internet have lost, essentially. And the people who took advantage of it disrupted those previous companies. And what's more astounding is the internet went on to create 1,000 times more value than people estimated in 1999. So at the peak bubble, people thought that, this is as big as it's going to get. And now, almost, let's say 20, 25 years later, we have created 1,000 times more value than that. And so we expect that same curve to happen with Gen AI. And so we can use a lot of those same lessons. Specifically, we're still in the early days of the internet. So because it's a new platform, nobody knows who's going to win. And the tech is improving extremely rapidly, such that users themselves don't even have solid preferences yet. So the stuff we're going to tell you is very early research, but we have a strong sense that it's correct, but it's super evolving. And the most exciting part about all this is the game is yours to capture. So I would almost say we're going to tell you some secrets in this webinar, because this data has been, let's say, locked up for people in our course, or webinars or executive workshops that we've done, and now we're releasing it. And people have used these secrets or these myths to create millions of dollars of value. And so we're super excited to share that with you today, but that's the premise of this webinar. So the first thing we're going to dive into is the actual tech behind Gen AI. At this point, people are very familiar with what Gen AI can do in general, but there's still a few things people get wrong. Number one, note that Gen AI or generative AI is a marketing term. It's not an actual technical term. Generative AI is actually composed or refers to various different types of models, like generative adversarial networks or transformer models or variational autoencoders. Basically, what that means is if you're a non-technical person, like you're a business professional, don't go around saying you work in Gen AI. We see this happen all the time with business professionals, especially. Nobody calls themselves a Gen AI engineer. They call themselves an ML engineer, a machine learning engineer. So you shouldn't call yourself a Gen AI business professional necessarily. You should be calling yourself a machine learning professional, or some sort of technical professional in some sense, or ML business professional. Definitely not a generative AI business professional, unless you know you're doing it for marketing's sake. If you're going to an engineering team, just don't use the word Gen AI, use the word machine learning. Okay. There's various types of Gen AI applications, and I will be using the words and terms Gen AI going forward, because obviously we all understand what it means. The first type is a collaborative type of generative AI application. So this is every idea is amplified and every possibility is explored while you work. So you have an assistant that works along beside you. There's personalized generative AI, which everything is created for you. So everything will become a market of one. And then there's proactive. Generative AI does an action for you. Those are the three types. And why those are the three types is because if you project all of these going forward, you can see a world where Gen AI surrounds you in everything you do. So now you open up TikTok or Instagram and you see all these creators. In the future, that could potentially be all done with generative AI. Collaborative, you potentially have a lot of team members that work with you. In the future, that could be all generative AI assistants. And proactive, something is done for you. You have to go out and do a list of chores. That's all done for you. And so there's a bunch of enabling technologies behind this, which we won't dive into, like text, image, audio, video. But just know that when people talk about generative AI now, people think about, oh, I'm doing like a writing chatbot or something like this. But the most significant sort of advancements are sort of 5-10 years ahead of us. Cool. So the first paradigm shift I want to talk about with the tech associated with Gen AI is previously you needed a lot of data and infrastructure and algorithms to build your own model. So this is something like a Facebook or a TikTok. They had all these data centers and all these data scientists to make an amazing recommendation algorithm. Now, those models come fully functional out of the box. And people don't realize how drastic of a change this is. Not only is generative AI really amazing and really smart, OpenAI and all these people have actually made it public for everybody. That's the equivalent of Facebook saying, you can use a recommendation algorithm, just give us your content and we'll rank it for you. And that's amazing. So that's a second change that's happened. And because of that, or in part of this, we see a lot of more opportunities and sort of investment opportunities open up. And we're going to talk really quickly about how to access these models, and then we're going to talk about those investment opportunities in a second, and how you can potentially make a lot of money, and how people have potentially used this webinar to sort of really advance their goals and either make money or get into their own careers. The first one is to call a model creator. So the first one is you can call something like an OpenAI or a DeepMind with an API. The second one is you can host your own open source model. There's plenty of open source models, plenty that rival the more closed sourced versions like Llama 3.1. And the amazing part about this is that these resources are democratized like never before. If you take one thing away from the session, take away that most people aren't recognizing the massive paradigm shift that free intelligence is providing to people. Completely free intelligence that you can host by yourself. And that opens up a ton of new investment opportunities, which we're going to talk about in a second. But we're going to take a quick pause. Does anybody have any questions so far about the technical section? You can post them in the chat and we'll wait a few seconds if you do.
So Aditya, one question that did come up in general that we have is, do you need to know the technical details of generative AI to be a good leader?
That's awesome. Yeah. So this is an amazing question, which we're actually going to cover in depth in a few sections. So I'm not going to talk about right now because we are going to talk about it in more detail in the personal section, specifically in how you can succeed as a professional in really succeeding in generative AI or in this new post-AI world. Okay, cool. So Somanath, I don't entirely understand the question of can you add more details what for staging open source model means. Could you describe that in a little bit? If you describe that question a little bit more, I'm happy to answer it. Okay, cool. And for Yihang and Yusuf, we'll get to those two questions in a bit as well. And just, you can mark those questions if I don't answer them later for Yusuf and Yihan, and I'll answer them at the end. Cool. Let's talk really quickly about some types of Gen AI companies. And specifically, we want to talk about where the most money is and where people are going to make the most money. And so there's three types of major companies that take advantage of Gen AI. The first one is what we call takers. They just take the model and they put a user interface in front of it. This is the best place to start. The second one is a model customizer, which is a customer that takes the model, adds their own data into it, and then customizes the model. This is the best long-term place to be. And then there's a final model creator who actually goes out and create the models. And we're going to talk in a second about how everybody's wrong about where most of the money is in these cases. But first, we're going to layer these companies in a second. And so, give me a second. Okay, cool. The first one is you have to understand where those companies make where you can make a lot of money with those companies, or who's going to make a lot of money. We first have to understand the technical stack a bit and the industry stack. So just know at the bottom, there's compute hardware. These are companies like NVIDIA that make the chips. Cloud platforms that sit on top, like Google and Amazon and Azure. And then on top of those, there's people who create the models using Azure and all those data services, and then people who take those. And then there's people who create those models and make them open source, and then people who customize those open source models or sort of take them and put them in front of users. That's important to note because I'm going to ask you a question in a second, and you can post your answers in the Q&A of who do you think you should invest your money into? And we're going to talk about how most people get this question wrong, but we still want your answers. So what company would you invest $1 million into? Mistral AI, which is on the left, is a model creator. So they make models, and they've recently raised a lot of money, and they've made cutting edge models, and they're doing really well. An amazing team. Thomson Reuters Westlaw is a legal database, as in it holds a bunch of legal cases and who won what and how they won and the results and associated information. If you had $1 million, and they're super old company, if you had $1 million, what company would you invest into? And we're gonna wait a few minutes and get people's questions and get people's answers in the chat. Okay, so maybe I gave it away too much because most people are saying Westlaw, and that is correct. Westlaw is the one you should invest in. And we're going to talk about why in a second. Uh, and the myth is that model creators will make more money. Actually, it seems like it's 50-50 Westlaw, Mistral. But, actually, it seems like most people are saying Mistral, and it's actually wrong. The myth is that model creators will make all of the money, and that's wrong. In fact, the reality is models are becoming customized, and so these model creators are actually sort of competing against commoditized competing models, and they're not struggling to make money, but there's not a lot of money to be made there. In fact, um, you know, we're going to really talk about how this democratization is making it such that these Gen AI models are providing these really accessible foundation models to app developers, such that these app developers can unlock 10 times more businesses without running any significant investment in their own data science centers. And because of that, we're going to talk about how this affects the profit of each layer. And so we're going to talk about compute hardware. The hardware folks like NVIDIA are super defensible, and they're going to make a ton of money with that. Cloud platforms will probably provide the same sort of profitability profiles as they've previously provided with cloud. So quite high, but not insane, as compared to actually model app users. So these takers and these customizers we were talking about earlier. Specifically, these takers and customizers we're finding are actually making the most amount of money. And we're going to spend a few seconds explaining why. So, number one, the biggest myth is that these wrappers, which are these apps that take ChatGPT and large language models and put a user interface in front of them, don't make a lot of money. So an example for this could be Perplexity, or there's various ones like Julius and things like this that customize ChatGPT for data scientists or for researchers or whoever. In fact, these apps are making a ton of money, and this is why ChatGPT or these LLMs are only used regularly by, let's say, a maximum around 100 million people a month. That means there's still 8.9 billion people in the world who don't use ChatGPT or these LLMs regularly, which also means that making ChatGPT or these LLMs accessible to those 8.9 billion people is extremely lucrative, like extremely lucrative opportunity. And that's what these wrappers are doing. And they're making a ton of money doing that. That's number one. Number two, people have pointed out that data is the real oil. We're going to talk about in a second how that's not entirely true. Data is quite significant, but what's even better is another type of competitive advantage that large companies have, which I won't give away just yet because we're going to ask it as a question in a few seconds. But if there's any questions on this, we'll answer this at the end of this section. But I'm going to talk enough. That's enough about the profitability section. I'm going to now ask you a question, which I just said I would ask, which is, what is the biggest moat in generative AI? So that could be a newer or better model, which includes taking a model and making it better with customized data, having more GPUs, having better user experience, or having better distribution, which means, accessing a large number of users at once. So post your answers quickly in the chat, and then we'll talk about who's right. Okay, nice. A lot of good answers coming through. Okay, the split seems to be mostly between user experience and distribution, with some people answering other places. Oh, sorry. Somebody asked, what is a moat? A moat is a competitive advantage. A moat is something that allows you to differentiate yourself with your competitors. Okay, so the answers seem to be split between user experience and distribution mostly, with some people saying GPUs. The people who said distribution are correct. So congrats to those folks. Why that is because, people talked about potentially data being the new oil. That used to be true. When you had to make your own ML models and your own AI models, it's not, it was necessary that you needed a lot of data because you essentially constructed these models from scratch. But now that's not true anymore. You don't necessarily need better models or better data because these models are so good out of the box. So that's number one. Data is not necessarily the biggest killer. User experience is really valuable. If I had to give the second best answer here, it would be for sure user experience. But it's still not the best because even if you have a subpar user experience, if you have access to a large number of users, that's actually also fine because our research has found that people will take even a slightly worse user experience if the results help them. It doesn't really matter if the user experience has to be amazing as long as the results are somewhat helpful. And that's what distribution offers you. And so distribution is really the key to winning here. And we're going to talk about how that affects the types of companies that are going to win. And so when people think about, hey, making these, if you're a startup or if you're a large company, let's say you're a startup, previously potentially the way to win would be, hey, how do I gain the best model or gain the best data or make the amazing user experience that people will always come back. And now sort of the game is, how do I get this into the hands of everybody as quickly as possible in this new market, this rest of this 8.9 billion people, so that they can start to use my product? That's the new people way of winning. Okay, cool. So let's bust the myth versus reality then. Previously, like we just talked about, the biggest advantages used to be talent and infrastructure and models, stuff that big tech companies used to have, because you needed that to make your own model. Now, the biggest advantages are distribution, like we talked about, user experience, which is second, and then data. And so what that means is if we look at the moats, they've been flipped completely with Gen AI. So now the strongest moat is distribution and the weakest moat is algorithm, which is amazing. So you can see here, distribution, user experience, and then data for the people who guessed user experience and data. And so the paradigm shift is you previously needed a lot of money, a lot of models, and thousands of employees to win. And now all you need is just really good UI, UX, some unique data, and 10 employees. And those three things will enable you to get good distribution. Okay. Well, between these two companies, the answer is already highlighted here, but between these two companies, IBM and JP Morgan, if you had to guess which company was better positioned to succeed in Gen AI, it would be JP Morgan, which is kind of interesting because IBM has a lot of talent, it has a lot of money, it has way more GPUs, it has all these things. But JP Morgan has a wider distribution to actually more end users, and then it can potentially build a flywheel with the data and the user experience in that iterative model. So JP Morgan is the better position to win in generative AI. And in this case, not that I'm giving you any stock advice or investing advice, but most of the market doesn't understand this. And so most of the market thinks, oh, IBM is going to win. So whenever they make a generative AI announcement or whenever generative AI comes out, IBM stock goes up. But in fact, it should be JP Morgan stock that's going up. And in fact, if anything, JP Morgan stock or its equivalents are undervalued compared to their potential for generative AI. Again, this is not any investment advice. I'm just telling you that this is a mistake a lot of people make. Okay, cool. So that means, just to recap, that the key AI winners used to be big tech companies because they had a lot of money, a lot of models, these like very specialized employees. Now, the key generative AI winners are actually non-tech companies. And they themselves don't realize this. And the mistake that they make is they keep on building internal tools and things that don't really take advantage of this new world. And hopefully, if you're part of those companies, you'll start realizing that you are actually better positioned to succeed than these tech companies. Because the real value is in integrating AI to enhance existing systems, because you already have a lot of distribution and you can pump generative AI experiences through those. So they have a lot of data and they have a large user base. And so of these four companies, let me explain the last question before I take some questions on who would you think is best positioned to succeed in generative AI. Chatbase is a company that takes ChatGPT and puts it on a website. That's it. That's all it does. And you can ask questions about the website through that chatbot. Cohere makes models. They make amazing models, like some of the best in the enterprise world, but they make models. RizGPT allows you to test, essentially allows you to improve how you talk to other people. In some cases, it's for dating. In some cases, it's just to have a conversation with a chatbot. And Perplexity allows you to search and get better results with generative AI. So which of these companies do you think is best positioned to succeed? And people are asking, where's the chat button? I believe that's just I think the Q&A box is the chat button. So just post your answers in there. Which of the four companies do you think is best positioned to succeed? Okay, so the answers mostly seem to be split between chat-based Perplexity and RizGPT. And you know what? And most people are saying Perplexity. So the real value is nobody said Cohere. Actually, a few people are now saying Cohere. The only wrong answer is Cohere. The rest are all well positioned to succeed, because Cohere, and actually we made this slide a while back, and now Cohere is actually laying off employees. They're cutting back a lot of deals. So you're actually seeing some of these cracks happen, because, and we're not commenting on a specific company in this case, we're just commenting on the general trend. And this is again not any investment advice, but the rest of these companies have these ability to put really good user experiences in front of these models and are getting a lot of distribution. In this case, let me explain really quickly why all of these could work well. RizGPT got sold for, I think, millions of dollars. Chatbase, is making millions in ARR, and Perplexity has, I think, 100 million users or something. So all of them are doing quite well. I can't really compare if any of them are doing better than the other. I think more people are familiar with Perplexity because it's a B2C product. Okay, so we're going to pause for the end of this section, and we're going to take some questions before we go to personal tips. Cool.
Great. So first question, do you think the current models are good enough? I agree you don't need large data, but models are not specialized to a specific task, and nowadays big companies need to specialize models for specific tasks. For example, due to EU Act, privacy issues, etc.
Okay, cool. So this is a good question. So number one, this is the mistake a lot of people make. So they often think that they need to do a lot of they need to update a lot of their models a lot with their own data to really differentiate themselves. And research from our course basically highlights that that's not necessarily the case. If you implement even the most basic Gen AI functionality into your app or website or experience somewhat seamlessly, that itself is a lot of value. Let me provide an example. There's a company called CarMax in which you can sell and buy cars. And all they did is they didn't do a chatbot that's customized to help you buy cars or take a model and helping you determine between cars or anything like that. All they did was they summarized car reviews. That's all they did. And it is one of the most helpful generative AI features that's been launched. And it's one of the most helpful features that they themselves have launched. And there's no customization there needed. And in fact, what we found is a lot of companies get stuck in this customization or fine-tuning process when it's not really necessary. The best companies we found succeed when they distribute just a model out of the box, find a user scenario that somewhat works, and then based off those signals, they then start to fine-tune it afterwards. And in terms of fine-tuning models being better than general foundation models, uh, that is technically true. But what we've also found from our research is, in most cases, even if you fine-tune a model with a lot of data, the next iteration, the next frontier iteration of the models often beats fine-tuning, even the fine-tuned models for your specific use case. And except in really specific parts where you have really unique data, like medical in the medical field or legal field. But yeah, okay, cool. So next question, Jess.
Yes. So, do tech companies like Google, Apple that have large distribution networks win as well? Would they win as well?
Yes. So this is again a key question. So they would win. So number one, they obviously have a large amount of distribution. I work at Microsoft. I understand that we have access to a billion users. We when we build products, we can immediately publish them to a large audience. But this is the advantage that non-tech companies have. All these tech companies can't train to talk when we talk about really specific data. All these banking, legal, healthcare companies, and all these places have all this data and access to a set of users that these tech companies don't have access to necessarily. These tech companies don't offer banking products or medical products or things like this. And so these companies have access to different users who use their products for a different use case. And thus you can almost think of them as a different set of users, have access to a lot more unique data and a different user experience and a different UI. So, these tech companies are positioned to win, but these non-tech companies are positioned to win like never before. And that's what I would say. And in fact, if they execute really well, like if JP Morgan really executes really well, they could potentially even perform better in generative AI than a lot of these standard tech companies. Because generative AI works best when there's other context involved, like banking context or medical context or whatever. Jess?
So, how can startup companies leverage this, and how can they find the right opportunities in this space? Because I know you were talking a lot about bigger companies, so the
Yeah.
questions around like startup companies and leveraging.
Yeah. So this is a great question because startups are also extremely well positioned to win in this space. Again, people say, hey, like, if distribution is how you win, then the large companies have everything it takes to win. But the real issue here is these large companies aren't moving on this opportunity. Some tech companies are, obviously, but especially these non-tech companies, they're moving super slowly, like extremely slowly. And so what you can do as a startup is target these companies, these industries like law, finance, healthcare, that have these sort of unique moats or these unique sets of data, and build really good experiences, or build sort of experiences that either help those professionals or help those end companies. A company that's gaining a lot of hype is a company called Harvey, which does this in the legal profession, where they help lawyers do a sort of customized ChatGPT for law. And there's plenty of versions of these in healthcare and all these places. Basically, the advantage for startups is there's tons of opportunities for these non-tech companies. They're not moving at all. They're super slow. And so as a startup, you can quickly move and take advantage of it. Okay. Like, for example, let me tell you right now, Westlaw has amazing data, amazing access to a large number of users, is doing nothing with generative AI, at least nothing substantial. Harvey's coming in, complete startup, and they're sort of completely disrupting the space. And they're started by some small 20-year-olds, like some young 20-year-olds. Okay, cool. So we'll move on. Any other questions we'll answer at the end, because we have a lot to get through. Okay, cool. We're going to talk about personal tips. And this is a bit of a jump because so far we've talked about, where do you succeed as a company? Where is the most money? But I want to take a bit of an aside because this is the most common question we get from professionals. How do I succeed? What do I need to do? And especially we get this from non-technical professionals. So we get this from more business-oriented professionals. And so I want to talk through, how we've seen people succeed. And the curriculum where we're going to put out has helped people increase their compensation or their success significantly. I could speak to about one person who doubled their income to $500,000, or more than double their income, significantly increased their income to $500,000 because they sort of went out and took this curriculum quite seriously. And so, let's dive in. The first change is non-technical people used to not be able to build because you had to learn how to code and do all the system architecture and all these things. Now, non-technical people can build, and I'll explain why. And there's different there's a beginner to advanced level of building. But let me explain how your job as a non-technical person can change. Previously, let's say you're a PM, and you don't necessarily have to be a PM. You could be any sort of business professional. You can start to act as a data scientist way more than before, because now what a data scientist does, or an applied scientist, is they don't make new models. What they do is they give ChatGPT or these LLMs new data and ask it to be fine-tuned essentially. And it's as simple as uploading an Excel file, or they tune prompts. So they basically fiddle with the English language to make sure that they get the results that they want. And it's a reasonably easy skill to contribute. And if you pick it up and you can start going to these engineering teams or going to these technical teams or start doing it yourself, you can start saying, hey, I want to build this app, or I have this idea. And look, ChatGPT does it super well. Let me give you an example. We worked with a banker we didn't necessarily work with this banker, but we worked with this bank. And the banker in some regional branch put in a customer's information for a loan approval into ChatGPT. It was a company-approved instance. And ChatGPT provided a great answer as to why this person should get the approval. And they took that version and they provided the approval to the customer for the loan, and then you basically use ChatGPT for the rationale. And it was so helpful that the company sort of approved this use case for everybody to use. And now this banker is actually leading this initiative across the bank on launching generative AI. So their sort of career went from being a regional sort of bank representative to now leading this company-wide technical initiative. And it's all because they were just fiddling with prompts. And there's such a demand from these companies that even some small efforts really are appreciated. We talk to leaders all the time who say, our employees don't do enough of this and we want to see more. And so another thing is, if you're a business professional, one of the things you have to go ask is, hey, is this even feasible? If I want to build an app, how long would it take? That's like, how many engineers would we need? And you have to consider all of those estimates. Now you don't need to do any of that. Now you can go to ChatGPT and get the answer yourself. You can just say, hey, can you do this? If so, what do you need? All these things. And it provides the answer for you. We'll talk about this in a little bit more technical detail in a second, or in a few slides. And and also we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. But if you're in a tech adjacent role, how you communicate business requirements completely changes. Now you can come in with examples of prompts and output of content. You can be the leader in how generative AI limits or expands your scenarios. You can say, hey, you know what? You can be the leader in your organization for what generative AI can or can't do, and how feasible it is to get it to do a certain piece of the app. And then you can research data and privacy requirements beforehand. We're going to talk about it in a few seconds, more specifically about how you can do these things specifically to advance your career. So what can a PM do? And in this case, a PM is a non-technical person, basically a business professional. We went out and asked 50 executives and product leaders, basically business leaders, about how in this new world, a product manager or a business professional specifically can expand their respect and legitimacy and grow in the organization. The first thing is they need to understand the tech in depth. And we're going to talk about it in a second, what they mean by that and how much tech you need to understand. The second thing is understanding product vision. The third thing is can or does a PR, and a PR is a pull request. So if you can start to code even a little bit, even with prompting, that's earns a lot of legitimacy. And then the fifth one is gathering and defending, or the fourth one is gathering and defending requirements. We did this survey 3 years ago, or we've been doing this survey consistently. This year, understanding that tech in depth was by far the biggest jump. So how important it used to not be super important to understand the tech. Now it's extremely important. Leaders are really searching for business professionals who understand a lot more of the tech. And that's becoming increasingly important. And it's in fact the most important thing. So how do the best ML PMs, or the ML business professionals, grow and succeed? Obviously, the first advice was join a fast-growing company. The second advice is become technical. Then it's become a domain expert, and then it's build more side projects. Okay, so basically there's 3 paths to get into generative AI. Get technical, get niche domain experience, and ideally you do both. Of the 3, the most common question we then get is, which one should I do? Should I go out and get domain experience, like learn about a specific industry, or should I get technical? And most often the advice we give for our business professionals, and the advice we see works, is get technical. And let me spend a few minutes explaining why that is. Most business professionals already understand a little bit about their domain, a little bit about the industry. Like even if you're an accountant, let's say, you understand how accounting works. You don't necessarily understand how a specific industry works, but you understand how accounting works. If you're in manufacturing, obviously you understand how manufacturing works. And so what we find is that a lot of people opt for getting more deeper domain expertise. And number one, when we see get deeper domain expertise here, it's still with a mix of generative AI. So you still have to say, hey, I know manufacturing really well, but I know manufacturing in the context of AI. So I can tell you really specifically where AI is the most helpful. What use cases have been tried before, have not been tried? Where has AI been successful? Where has AI not been successful? Where are some primal, from initial customers I can get to try out some initial use cases for generative AI in a specific industry? And because a lot of people opt for this domain expertise route, it's actually really competitive, because some people have been in this industry for 30, 40 years, and they know so much. They know everybody in this space. It's really hard to get competitive. You have to know an extreme level of knowledge. On the technical side, a lot of business professionals shy away from it. They say, hey, I don't know how to code. I don't really understand that world. And we find that if those people try to get technical and they get more technical, they sort of become unicorns, because they are one of the few in the world who can bridge the gap between the technical side and the industry side. And I'm going to explain in a second what get technical means, because there's beginner, intermediate, and advanced. But the path that is more valuable, we often find, is get technical. The ideal is you have whatever 10, 20 years of domain expertise and you get super technical, then you're a unicorn. These are the types of people that we've seen make $500,000, $1 million in a few instances, because startups and industry leaders and companies pay so much money for this advice. And I can explain what examples of advice we mean by that. But okay, let's go talk about how to get technical. So there's 3 stages, like I said: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. If you're in this session, you've already probably passed the beginner section of how to get technical. Because in specifically related to generative AI, you just have to understand what are the rough tools, what are the rough implications, what can it roughly do at a high level. And that's pretty much it. The intermediate and advanced is really where most of the money starts to come in for a lot of these people, especially at the advanced level. So at an intermediate level, what we mean by how to get technical is you get extremely good at prompting. And this takes about 4 to 6 weeks, we've found. And this is like, number one, the basic level is, understanding how to use ChatGPT at a pretty deep level. Intermediate is using system level prompting and multi-prompt examples. So really understanding how to coach it to get a set of results that are really valuable. and and regular and consistently. What you do with advanced is you get achieve consistent results with multi-channel prompting. We'll explain what that means in a second. But using things like JSON formatting and checker LLMs. Let me give you an example. Like, let's say the LLM, like ChatGPT, you're using doesn't give you the right result the first time. You say, hey, can you give me a workout regime? And it gives you a sort of wrong workout regime. You have another LLM check the response with the specific things you're looking for, like saying, hey, I told them it had back pain. I had back pain. Is it recommending squats to me? Because if so, it's a bad workout program. So, redo it. So you have a checker LLM set up that checks that first LLM, and knowing how to understand JSON formatting and structured outputs from OpenAI and all these places, and doing things like chain of thought, which is like prompting LLMs to talk about how they get their reasoning right. And we won't talk about it in more detail, but that's the advanced stage. And if you really want to understand how these companies are making so much money, this is where most of it is, and especially in these wrapper ones. And so this is where, if you also learn this, you would also start to access those sort of worlds. The second one that's important to understand is data boundary and associated systems architecture. So, really quickly, and we won't spend too much time on this because we have so many other things to cover. This is just understanding how you can call generative AI in your own company or personal boundaries. For example, we work with so many companies who think that they can't use generative AI or they can't use these closed models from OpenAI and all these places because, they'll break the EU Act or they'll break these privacy acts. And that's just not true. All of these cloud companies, if they work on cloud, run these models within these companies' data boundaries. They just have to call it within their data boundary API. But it's astounding how many companies don't know this. Like, I think let's say if we work, like 99% of the people we work with don't know this, which is, astounding. And so they go through all of this infrastructure to host their own model, but they just need to know this. So the few business professionals who know this provide so much value because they're saving millions, and thus they're rewarded with an associated compensation package. So just knowing data boundary and associated systems architecture, how to call generative AI in your own data boundaries, understanding data flow diagrams, understanding storage systems is really helpful. Advanced is really where we get to those really big numbers. So there's two paths you can take. If you're a big org worker, or we find this also works with technical adjacent workers, dive into systems architecture really deeply. So what you want to be able to do is you need to practice communicating these technical concepts to non-technical and technical people really deeply. And what that means is you need to understand, like, what is EUP, what is EUPI, like what is personal information, what are things like caching, what are things like stuff like this, so you can really dive into systems architecture. You don't necessarily have to code, and where to put in generative AI. Super valuable. These people are paid an incredible amount of money. For solo workers or non-tech adjacent folks, maybe you're not in the discussions with those systems engineers, all these people. These people make a lot of money by using low-code or no-code tools with generative AI capabilities to either automate parts of their jobs or start to build. So some of these people we've seen learn to build apps without ever actually learning how to code. They don't even understand what ChatGPT outputs. They just prompt ChatGPT or these LLMs to give them code or give them an app, and copy paste that code into, an app or some sort of browser and have it work. And so these people also make a lot of money because, we've seen, for example, a nurse who made a patient intake tool, not by learning how to code, by just prompting ChatGPT to make that app. And then sort of that app made a significant amount of money. Okay, so we're going to take a quick pause on that personal section. Jess, any questions?
Yeah, so we'll do one question here because I know we're getting closer toward the time of the top of the hour. So we'll do one question and then move forward so we have time a little bit at the end for some more Q&A. So one question is, I see we're getting a lot of questions from people with specific problems they want to solve with generative AI. So what would you recommend as some good first steps, and how should they evaluate the opportunity and decide about the best next steps for their pain points and ideas?
You know what? This is great because it works well into our later sections of the most common mistakes people make, and how you should go about evaluating what is really a good idea or bad idea. So this works well. So let's dive right in. Um, so the second section should answer this. You know what? Really quickly, we're going to cover how generative AI models, business models are different. And this is the first thing people sort of forget. We're going to go through it really quickly before we talk about how to evaluate generative AI ideas. Because number one, the thing people get wrong is they think of generative AI like a typical subscription model where they say, hey, there's a typical subscription price. There's a total Gen AI that it's a typical subscription price. And typically software would always operate within that sort of subscription price. Like if you charge $8 a user, you typically wouldn't incur a cost every time somebody uses that new product. But with generative AI, that cost goes up with usage. And so that means, and it often looks like this, where generative AI goes up exponentially as usage goes up. So often a lot of SaaS or software as a service business models don't really end up working out. So that's why you'll see companies potentially like Perplexity that actually lose a lot of money because even though they charge users for their usage, especially if you go to the premium plan, they quickly start to break that cost barrier pretty soon. So just remember that as you start to investigate these ideas, know that a lot of the dollar per seat or dollar per person or dollar per month business models are breaking with generative AI. Okay, so we're going to talk about now answering the question, prioritizing generative AI opportunities. How should you think about which generative AI product or project to pick? And we're going to give you some quick tidbits. So number one, let me give you 3 of the most common options people come to us with. Build an internal facing tool because they want to build up the expertise and capabilities while helping increase efficiency internally. A user-facing feature, or buying a Gen AI chatbot software or some other software and white labeling it. Most people build the internal facing tool, and they're wrong to do it. What you should be building always is a user-facing feature, and almost never an internal tool. It's just not recommended. And why that? And we're going to talk really quickly about how common this problem is. We did an analysis of the people who've implemented generative AI products, and almost everybody either does a chatbot or just an internal tool. 95% of people do a chatbot or internal tool. So that's 60 plus 35%. And when we asked people, how useful is your internal tool? 75% said not useful. 25% said somewhat useful. So basically 95% of people don't find it useful. So if you're building an internal chatbot, don't do it. Or an internal tool, don't do it. It doesn't help you build the skills that you need. To build the skills that you need, let's just walk through this really quickly. What you should do is keep whatever feature you're doing in private preview. Avoid chatbots or free-form interactions because it allows people to put in inappropriate information and potentially unethical pieces, and you get into a lot of legal trouble if you give the wrong answer. Always do in-product features and just test rigorously. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to build the capabilities you need to build great user-facing features. And the research from our course highlights that companies who focus on user-facing features. So that's number one. But basically don't build an internal tool if you're picking a generative AI opportunity. Almost anything, or a chatbot also doesn't really work super well. Though both of those are pretty tough to iterate and work with. But if you focus on almost any other problem, it works out well. And we're going to quickly talk about how to implement those really quickly, and then we'll take some questions. The thing that most people get wrong is when they go out and create these generative AI products, they create products for creation. So they'll say, hey, a product that helps people write emails and essays within just a few prompts is what people love, versus a product that helps people read documents and emails easily and summarizes key concepts. But research from our course shows that users love the second option and they hate the first option. So when you're building a tool or a generative AI feature, prioritize content creation. Or sorry, do not prioritize content creation. That's not recommended, but you should prioritize is content consumption, which means making it easier for people to consume content and understand things better. So, and why we think that people often do the content creation side is because the first wave of generative AI products was this sort of naive back and forth, talking to ChatGPT, can I get an answer? Can I get this? Can I get, could you answer this question for me? A request response setup. But users are getting tired of that. In fact, what people want now is they want to take a lot of information and just take the key insights out of it through generative AI. In fact, research from our course shows that content consumption is on average useful to very useful. On a scale of 1 to 4, it's 3.5 on how useful it was. Content creation was just a 1 or 2. So people love content consumption for generative AI. They hate content creation. So let me give you some examples. Like, instead of creating a legal document or having lawyers create legal documents, you should analyze historical case outcomes to advise on legal strategy. So instead of creating personalized documents or proposals for potential clients, you should leverage market trends and sort of refine sales pitches. And instead of generating product specs or generating product emails, aggregate user feedback and tell product people like what they should be building next. We won't go through too many of these examples, but they're here for you. Some of the best generative AI examples we've seen companies that work really well are companies that listen to sales calls or customer service calls and tell people how they can perform better, which is really exciting, versus, for example, creating a customer service agent. Okay. So we won't walk through all these examples. The second final tip is don't build a chatbot. Instead, build AI features natively into a product. Users hate building it using or working with a chatbot. Most people aren't willing to use a chatbot. Almost 99% of people are not willing or only somewhat willing to use a chatbot. And if they do, 80% find it not useful. And this is the modern version of Gen AI chatbots. Versus if you build a Gen AI feature into a product, 90% are pretty excited to use that product, and almost 55% find it useful. So this is, 10 times more useful for users. Okay, cool. So we definitely answered that question in a little speedy format because we want to leave time for some questions at the end. So Jess?
Yeah, so I think because we are a minute away from ending at the top of the hour, unfortunately, we don't have the time right now for some more questions, but is there any tips or takeaways that you want to share before we end the webinar with folks?
Nope. I think that's it. If you want any of your questions answered, just message me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to answer them there, just one-on-one.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Aditya. And just real quick, as a reminder, our new course with Aditya has launched. And if you're interested in learning more, please refer to the link here on the platform. And feel free also to reach out to our team via email. And we also have some other generative AI courses that are launching, and we can help you choose from some of those courses as well. So as mentioned, the recording of the webinar will be sent to everyone within the week. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.